just so glad to see.
Wait, what do you mean you're so glad? Look, we're about to get the show on the
I'm just so glad we're here. I'm so glad we're here live, and now we're talking over one another, which is the best way to start a show. Go ahead, Justin. Go ahead, lead us in.
That's how we always do. It's Torn Tuesday, folks. It is the last Tuesday of 2021. We are still in the middle of a pandemic. Things are going stronger than ever. So the wonderful Doug Adams and Jim Ware have offered to give us all a special treat since we're all on lockdown and at home and trying to play it safe and keeping our masks up and getting vaccinated. So since we're still in the middle of all this, here's a very, very special episode of Torn Tuesday where we're going to dive into
the most special. Because when you talk to the fans up close and personal, what did they opine about the most? The music. Literally, no one has conversations these days about the visual effects and how they made the Balrog come to life. No one talks about that, but the continuous conversation and the tenor of that conversation has never waned. It's always fan passion about the music. Am I not right?
I think so. Yeah. So the way this is going to work, everyone I'm sure by now is familiar with our corporate overlords at in music and video playback, and I think this show has been blocked a couple times on Facebook and YouTube. So we're diving into music that isn't on the main soundtracks. We're going deep, and to not get clipped, we have opened the Zoom. So if you go to our Facebook page or our YouTube page, actually just go to YouTube, youtube.com/thewanderingnet, and in the description you can see the link to the Zoom. There's 56 people in here now. More and more are joining. So I'm going to leave the chat room open, but I've turned off video and unmuting. So it is only us four going to talk, plus our little playback machine here.
This is incredibly clever. Very, very clever is what Gandalf would say to Bilbo right now. I cannot believe you've created such a roundabout so that we can gather together as a community and yet not get zapped by copyright infringement craziness, which is not the intention of this show, but to take a rather analytical and honest-to-God close-up look at this music and how it's made and how it's constructed, especially, in regard to this 20-year prism of distance that we have now.
Well, we see Matthew in the chat room, and Laswin says they've just created their first Zoom account ever.
See, there you go.
Join this. This is how important this is. So let's say hello. Hello, Doug. Hello, Jim.
Hello.
Good morning.
So this is a global show. Jim is staying up with us extra early in the UK, and Doug is Central Time, I believe.
Doug is freezing.
Freezing.
Am I back? Sorry. Give me the lead in again. I'll get it this time.
You're Central Time Zone, right? Good sir.
I'm Central Time Zone. I'm in Chicago. Yes. Yeah.
We just had someone in the chat from Australia say they're at 11 a.m. They're in Australia. Hello.
That's a very civilized time for this sort of thing.
Yeah,
absolutely. Very civilized. Poor Jim.
Not the UK. A lot of Europeans are begging us to record this, so we're gonna hit record on all of this. And let's see here. Hit record on this.
Recording in progress.
It just told me there's a recording in progress. So maybe we'll play this back for our European fans. But look, the guys that wrote the music of Lord of the Rings found a hard drive. Maybe not this one, but maybe another one. And it looks similar to this, with a bunch of music that is not on any of these soundtracks at all. Tell us, what are we about to jump into right now?
Well, it's slightly more official than a discovered hard drive, I guess. We should probably clarify there's no piracy at work here. One of the last things while I was working on the book, The Music of the Lord of the Rings films with Howard Shore, one of the last things that we wanted to do was do a compilation of music that had not made it into the final films or the final albums. These things always generate dozens and dozens and dozens of drafts, especially given the way that they recorded these. And maybe Jim can talk about that process in a moment here. But because of that, in the basement of Howard Studios was just shelves and shelves and shelves of these alternate compositions. And he has a lovely listening room there. And once the book was mostly written and we're sort of in the final throes of all that, it was my job to cart the music up from the basement, take it up to the listening room, and just sit and comb through days worth of audio, weeks worth of audio, to
I think
the
it was
little wonderful nuggets in there. Yeah.
I think it was actually one continuous month of audio.
Yes, I think
the,
so.
the final stat.
I think I went through just about every take of every composition, which you do sort of start to go cross-eyed after a while, but you can make it happen. I don't know, Jim, do you want to describe how their particular recording process generated so much alternate material?
Yeah, I mean, the thing to bear in mind about these scores is that they are incredibly long. These films are scored pretty much wall to wall, and the recording budget for these scores was extravagant, to say the least. So, in terms of recording most film scores, you probably have maybe up to about 10 recording sessions. For something like Fellowship of the Ring, on the other hand, I think there were 60 sessions. So that's 60 3-hour sessions to record around about 3 hours of music. That is a lot of time, which gave Howard Shore the opportunity to go back and redraft things and re-record things if the film changed for any reason. In most sort of film score scenarios, you wouldn't have the time or the budget to do that, and it would just be a case of editing the music after the fact for Lord of the Rings for the most part. If something changed in the film, if it was just even if it was just sort of basic timing issues with the composition, Howard Shore would go back and re-record it rather than rely on the music editors to actually artificially trim it. So that just results in a huge amount of music being recorded. And that's before we even get into the sort of realms of entirely different compositions where the filmmakers requested different approaches to things. But we'll hear some of that later.
And so that brings up, we talked with the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra earlier this year, big reunion, the first orchestra to play Howard Shore's music. And they said it was remarkable because on the first day when they had hundreds of musicians and everyone's on their day rate, like, you know, time is money in these recording sessions. When you think of how many people are in an orchestra and everyone's making a living union wage and everything like that. So it's like every effort is made to record as fast as possible and as best as possible. But the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra told us that on the first day, Howard Shore spent the first day explaining the history of the dwarves to the entire orchestra, something that is irrelevant to the music that they were about to play. They're just going to read off a music sheet. But he felt that it was so important, Howard Shore felt that it was so important that people understood the historical significance of the music they're about to play. This is the type of thing that only a big budget allows, as Jim was just saying.
But Howard was always very keen to put everything into context for the musicians, so the musicians knew everything about the world that the music was representing.
It's something we take for granted in the classical repertoire. You know, people know the stories behind Beethoven Ninth or Shostakovich Fifth or things like that, and it does affect how performances are shaped. In the film world, you rarely even know what's on the screen when you're playing. You know, people who played on some of these classic scores of the 80s and 90s still haven't gotten around to seeing the films. It's just, you know, not part of the process. So I think it was very important to Howard to get the performance out of the players with that sort of information in mind.
And that's what a budget allows. And so the exciting news, you know, before we jump into what was 20 years ago, you know, just a quick programming note on what's happening with Amazon. The current rumors are Amazon has made a deal with Howard Shore to return to Middle Earth. He is working with another composer for this show. In what capacity? We don't know. So I guess the question is, Doug, you worked with Howard Shore in putting together the music of Lord of the Rings and everything like that. Have you heard from him lately?
I talked to him just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, I think we're due to catch up sometime pretty soon.
Man, When isn't that going to be something? And, yeah, and right before the show, we were just talking about how music and television, television music has infinitely smaller budgets than film composition and film soundtracks. And if you've watched any of the behind the scenes of like The Mandalorian, you can see it's literally just one dude at a keyboard, like composing most of the music for these TV shows. In fact, the Book of Boba Fett comes out tonight, I think, with a whole new Boba Fett score. So it's going to be interesting to see what Boba Fett sounds like now. So, Cliff, we've talked about, everyone's nervous about Amazon's billion-dollar budget. Like, holy smokes, this is a lot of money. But look, I think that type of money allows for a level of music sophistication that we've never heard on television.
I would expect them to make a show of it. I would expect them to flaunt this quality, that they're spending that kind of money on it, and probably include it in the press release and make it talking points with all the journalists of the world. If they go full orchestra, if they go with a larger scale of production for the show in a way that they've not done with previous TV shows, I would expect them to brag. Wouldn't they do that? I mean, and isn't it something that we would appreciate? There's two sides of that conversation, of course. There's, where you're looking at their process of marketing the film, but honest to goodness, from a fan point of view, wouldn't we want to have some behind the scenes clips of Howard coming back to conduct, in a beautiful big recording studio? And what if they went all the way top tier and went to Abbey Road again? I mean, that is what we crave. This is probably why, we're even having this conversation today, that Amazon reached out and properly went through, approaching Mr. Shore to actually get him to come back and help create more themes for Arda and expand the musical canvas of, not just a little geographic region concerning itself with the War of the Ring, but now imagine a musical canvas going much, much farther abroad across the creation, the secondary world of Arda. It's kind of mind-blowing what they could do in terms of throwing money at it, and in terms of the work, the actual music, and how Howard could find it a very fertile playground for more musical ideas. I don't know if anyone's with me on that, but yeah, I think there's a lot to go in there, a big, deep consideration of how much money could they spend. It's no object. It is no object to them at all. So therefore, why the hell not? Wouldn't they go full bore with a very big group of musicians and the biggest and best studio and recording engineers and the best staff, and get Howard, if he was willing, God willing and the creek don't rise, as they say back home where I grew up, why wouldn't Howard just want to come back and do it? And it would be like glorious. It would be a thing. It would be another cultural moment in Tolkien, Lord of the Rings fandom. It would be seismic, to be honest, because like I said at the top of the show, we're not sitting here talking about the green screen or the latex makeup that Lawrence Makaware was wearing to be Lurtz. We're still sitting around the dining table with family, and we're talking about, oh, I love Howard Shore's music. It is so amazing. Here, put that on in the background. That's where we're at as a fandom still. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they threw a ton of money at Howard and said, let's do it. It's glorious. Let's do it.
I think we're burying the lead here. What they really need is a couple of fine music consultants to keep everything straight for them.
That's exactly what they need.
That's merely my opinion. But I do think, yes. I think there's a wonderful recognition of the fact that much of the artistic and frankly commercial appeal of these projects is its relationship to music. The Lord of the Rings films today are very much known for their music in both the sort of deep dive worlds of fandom and the casual fans. They, you go to the average person on the street and you remember that Fellowship of the Ring movie? Oh yeah, the music was great. Da, 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 da. There is a cultural awareness of that. And I think it's obviously something that, again, not to be crass, but from a purely commercial standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to tap into that. It's part of the selling point of these things.
So let me ask you this before we jump into this rare music that you're about to hear. finishing up with Amazon, we've heard that they've locked the edit on the first 2 episodes, and it's going into visual effects where they add all the CG and take out all the wires and stuff. But the show is not supposed to come out until September of next year, so we're 9 months away from the show debuting. How much time did Howard have to fully score Fellowship?
Fellowship came out in December of 2001, and he was working on it. He recorded stuff in the spring before that, and been composing for some time before that. So it takes a while on these things.
Yeah. So
once you have your themes established, you can sort of roll with it. But when you're creating new themes, it does take a bit.
Yeah, I think he was definitely writing the Moria stuff and other pieces in, I think, March 2001.
Yeah.
I think everything was finished pretty much by the time of the final London recording sessions, which would have been September onwards. So
yeah,
a good 6-7 months.
In terms of,
it's a laborious process. These things aren't done in the sort of, well, I'm speaking of the Lord of the Rings films, but those scores were done in a sort of old-fashioned pencil and paper way. It was not to say that there wasn't any sort of technology involved, but they were done old school, maestro hunched over the piano style composition.
I was going to ask, in terms of late end production before a film gets released, which schedule was the most difficult? What deadline was the worst? I mean, we're talking about 6 different films where Howard was doing music. Which one had the most difficult deadline? If I'm not surprised, I thought it would be The Desolation of Smaug, because when I watched the Michael Pellerin behind the scenes, there seemed to be a lot about a difficulty in getting that final cut finished on time.
The process kind of changed on the Hobbit scores, so it's difficult to make that comparison. For Lord of the Rings, Jim, I'd say probably Return of the King was the most down to the wire, wouldn't you?
They were still recording in like mid-November. So
right.
Return of the King, yeah. So that was quite late. I think the sessions ended up overrunning by about a month and a half.
Yeah.
Purely because the film just wasn't finished.
Generated the famous Howard quote that I think made it into the book. There's too much movie in this movie.
Well, yeah. That's wild to have compositions and recordings still working in November when you're trying to get the final cut processed into the lab. And that was back when they still did 35 millimeter prints. So yeah, they had to go to a lab to get that.
Yeah, this was not digital distribution, no.
That's right. Yeah, they had a real hard and fast deadline. That's wild. I appreciate that story. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate everybody. There's nearly 100 people in the Zoom already. So this is how it's going to work. We're still streaming to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. And you guys can follow along the conversation as much as you want there. But you're not going to hear any music. If you want to hear the music that we're about to talk about and go deep with, you want to join the Zoom. You'll probably want to do one or the other. The chat is open, but no mics. No cameras and no mics in Zoom. But you'll be able to hear the music. The stream should be fairly quiet. And that's just the world we live in. So you know what? Let's dive in. There is a ton of music. Again, this is all music and outtakes that are not on the complete recordings. You might have seen our tweet earlier today. On eBay, the complete recordings are going for thousands of dollars. They always have been. Before the vinyl reissue and before they were available on iTunes and digital, the CDs of the complete recordings were going for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. The complete recordings are some of the most cherished and have been the most expensive music soundtracks for the last 15 years. They're incredibly hard to get, and they're incredibly desired. We're going beyond the complete recordings today with the Rarities archive and tracks that you won't hear anywhere else, outtakes and everything, courtesy of our friends here, Doug Adams and Jim Ware. So all they ask is that you follow them on social. Doug Adams Music on Twitter and Jim J. Ware on Twitter and Instagram. Just give them a follow and give them a thanks, and let's dive in. What do you guys want to? I'll kind of let you guys lead this conversation. So what do you guys want to start with?
I think we were going to start today with the album, The Rarities Archive, which is here in the back of the book. You can see that we've got it bundled in there. I think it's technically the only Lord of the Rings CD that's still in production at the moment. Doesn't mean there will never be a reprinting of the complete recordings, but this one is still out there.
Is this book for sale? The hardcover for sale?
Right now? Yeah. You can get it on Amazon or wherever you choose to get books. Amazon seems like a good corporate synergy right now.
And isn't it on like an incredible like 6th edition printing or something like that?
We're getting pretty close to the end of the stock for the 6th printing, so there may be a 7th printing in the future. I certainly hope there is. I would hate to have it go out of print, but it's still available on that 6th printing. So,
well, congratulations on its continued success.
I don't think it had anything to do with me. I think it's all the appeal of Howard's brilliant score, but it's I'm more than happy to ride his coattails.
All right, and people in the chat room are saying, how do you access the Zoom? I'm going to put in the chat window on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. I'm going to put the Zoom meeting ID and the passcode. Or if you go to YouTube, it's in the description, just one click. And everyone in the chat on Zoom are saying, will this be archived? Well, let's see how it goes, okay? Mm-hmm. If I can find a way to archive this and make it available later, trust me, we don't want to gatekeep any of this, but we don't want to get clipped by the copyright cops. But we are discussing this in an informational and educational setting, so we should legally be allowed, but YouTube can get complicated. So that's it. People want the link to the chat. People want a link to your book in the chat room. So let's get the music playing while I start to look on Amazon for that. Okay. So we're gonna go to the Rarities Archive, and I guess we're gonna what's rare about this first track, I guess.
All right. Well,
I don't know. I don't know how to lead this.
Yeah, I know. It's well, you can imagine how long it took us to try to figure out how to present all of this. The overall concept of the Rarities Archive was to take these pieces that hadn't been heard in this form before, which is tough because these are long compositions and sometimes it's just a certain passage that's a bit different. So we sort of put everything back into more or less story order, and it's a combination of compositions that feature prominently unused passages. We have some of the original mock-ups that Howard did when he was creating these themes. We can sort of talk about what that process was like. But in the interest of doing it in story order, the first thing we have on here is an alternate version of the prologue from the Fellowship of the Ring. And people have probably noticed that was a bit different, actually significantly different, on the original soundtrack album that came out way back in the day. Alternate opening. This is not how the score opens in the film. And this is from a different version of the prologue that didn't begin with the same sort of soft-spoken Galadriel narration that we eventually ended up with. Mm-hmm. So this is a text by Philippa Boyens. You can hear the chorus singing. It's called The Prophecy. And the lyrics here are in Quenya, and the translation, I'm not going to attempt Quenya as ever. My Elvish is rubbish, so I'm leaving it out. But the text is, the seer speaks. Out of the black years come the words, the herald of death. Listen, it speaks to those who were not born to die. And then just leaves off with the words, the rings fell.
Now, Cliff, the final Galadriel dialogue is actually words from Treebeard in the book, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Treebeard's dialogue from the end chapter near the end of The Return of the King called Many Partings.
You'll hear a passage. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
I was going to say, it's probably worth noting that we could do a rarities disc just of prologue material. There is lot. There are a lot of different versions of this.
The prologue was one of the last sequences locked for the film, wasn't it?
The final music for the final version was the very last thing recorded.
Yeah. And this will point out a sort of abandoned idea that was meant to run throughout Fellowship of the Ring, which was the Gondor theme. We know the Gondor theme as sort of the central theme of Return of the King, and it does show up a little bit in Fellowship as it is, shows up a little bit in Two Towers as it is, but it was meant to feature quite a bit, there it is, in the Fellowship of the Ring. So the Gondor theme was supposed to play as the armies of men launched their attack. You can hear a nice big brassy statement. So we're getting into the music of men and this Gondor theme. And I think it was eventually felt it was just too much information. You don't really know who the men are. You don't really know who the elves are. This theme doesn't come back as much as some of the other ones. So why introduce it here? And for the sake of clarity, it was eventually not used in that manner. But it was used in the prologue. And as Jim points out, there were other settings of it in the prologue as well. And we'll hear it used later for the journey between the statues of the Argonath. But that was
there's a few sort of commonalities here with the final version. So the Ring Wraith material. And
sorry, Jim, say again. I think you got blown away by the LSO or LPO there.
That was probably the wrong music to attempt to talk over. So there's a few commonalities here with the final version, the Ring Wraith material that we heard just now, and some of the Golem material that we'll hear towards the end. The one thing that you won't hear anywhere in this version is the Ring theme, the history of the Ring.
Yeah, somebody's pointing out in the chat, this is indeed music that was not in the final film and is not on the soundtrack CDs. It's not on the short versions that came out with the films. It's not on the complete recordings. It's only on this disc that we have with the book. So we're very lucky for that.
So if you stick around a little bit later, we will play another version of this.
That we will. Now this is a little bit more familiar to what you hear in the final film. So there are passages, it's not like these, this is one of the tricks of presenting the rarities is it's very uncommon that the entire composition was a wholesale different composition. There's a little bit of the Ring theme in there. But they have these strange passages and different structures that were dependent upon the edits of the film. So it was very difficult to try to find a way to do this. Sometimes you'd have 30 seconds of alternate material in the middle of a 14-minute composition, and that's not really a good way to present anything.
And then within that, so I mean, within the scores themselves, you'll often see individual lines that are marked as cued, so the conductor can decide whether or not so the section in question plays that line. And generally speaking, it was everything that's written like that was recorded twice, either with the line or without. So pretty much everything has multiple versions.
Yes, yeah. There's a question here: did Shore score the working edits that I understand were around 5 hours roughly per movie? Well, you don't score a film head to tail in that manner, so he would have rough versions of some of these scenes, which is the case here with the prologue. So yes, in the case of individual scenes, but he didn't go all the way through it and write a completely alternate Fellowship score. Kind of score a chunk at a time.
I know that the Fellowship of the Ring was shortened considerably just before the recording sessions began in September 2001, necessitating a bit of last-minute rewriting. But a lot of that material was then later incorporated into the extended version.
Howard referred to that process as conforming the score in a lot of cases. If the music tonally was what they wanted it to be, you could take that composition and snip a beat here, snip 7 bars here, and sometimes extend things into very strange, a measure of 13/4 or something like that if they're musicians are. But they conformed it. And sometimes you would have to recompose. It was the only way to do it.
Well, what a great start. Gosh, we're already hearing stuff like, man, the Rohan theme and everything like that. And Doug's connections in and out.
Really wild. Yeah, Doug, if you're still here with us, it's wonderful to have both of you, Jim, and both of you, Doug, to guide us through this, what I call auditory gold. This is what someone in the chat room even better described as mithril for the ears. This is great stuff.
And shout out to
I'm
everybody in the
imagining-
chat room that are saying that they just bought the book. Like, so it's working.
It's great. I can only imagine some video essay on YouTube where someone is doing a split screen and then shows what the different alternate scores sound like at different moments. But it is very, very difficult to catalog and then present, like a sampling. You have to, I don't know, those editorial choices you had to make must be difficult. I don't envy you at all.
It's a lot of material. There's a lot of material to work through, and there's a lot of material on The Hobbit as well. But we'll touch on that some other time, I think.
And there
Yes,
are
absolutely.
a couple people in the chat room said that they've had this book for 15 years and they didn't know there was a CD in the back.
Really? Wow. Okay. Well, we hit it in there very
Wow.
subtly, so my apologies.
All right. So track 2 from the Rarities archive.
What's next? Yes, what do we have next lined up?
So this is one of the early synthesizer mock-ups, I believe. So essentially, this would be a way of demonstrating Howard's ideas for thematic material to the filmmakers.
So this is sort of early in the era of electronic music, in terms of like samplers and mocked up instruments and things like that. So Howard would compose these things as a handwritten sketch, and then during his, so if people don't know Howard's background, he was the original band leader on Saturday Night Live. That was sort of the beginning of his career with, I guess, media music, television music, film music, things like that. And as part of that process, he had a place in New York in the city near the 30 Rock studios, and he rented a room where he had a sort of the original big electronic instrument, a synclavier. And he hung onto that thing for years and years and years, and sort of knew other people that worked with synclaviers. And so when he came to do the Lord of the Rings themes, he had somebody mock them up on this ancient synclavier, which can do an approximation of electric instruments. To our ears these days, it sounds a bit dated. I think probably it's one of those instruments that used to take up an entire room and now probably could fit on an iPhone with no problem. But this is where he created these mock-ups. It's a way to show the filmmakers what these pieces would sound like, not just played by a piano or somebody humming them or what have you, sort of a way to give them an impression of what is this going to sound like.
Matt in the chat room says he's having a hard time processing this variation to what I've heard so many times before.
That's right.
Yeah, it's different. It goes in a slightly different direction to the way you expect and the way you're so used to hearing it for 20 years.
I'm going to play this one again because it's amazing. And I do want to point out that music for TV and film nowadays is produced like this demo was made. I mean, the Mandalorian and the Boba Fett show is just a guy at a keyboard. Hans Zimmer composed Tenet with zero orchestra, all on the keyboard.
Ah, yes.
Sampling technology has come on in leaps and bounds since the days of the synclavier and since 20 years ago.
Well, I guess this begs the question then, since it's been 20 years, do you think technology has improved to the point where they can make...
Absolutely not. 100% no. There is no electronic instrument that will ever equate a human performance. Tones, sound waves, things like that will get more and more sophisticated. A human being interpreting a phrase, you're not going to get there. You're not going
The
to
chat room agrees with you.
Yeah.
Amazon, are you listening?
I would thank you, Lutz, in the chat for correcting us there. It was Ludwig Göransson who did the music for Tenet, not Hans Zimmer.
That's right, yeah. Ludwig, who did that during the early stages of the lockdown. So a lot of the creative decisions were governed by the fact that you couldn't really get orchestras into rooms at that point. So
didn't Ludwig Göransson also do The Mandalorian?
He's a busy guy these days,
and the Boba Fett series,
and
which
some
has
Pixar
a
thing
very
too,
interesting
right?
theme.
Okay.
Oh,
Do you want to talk about the Boba Fett theme? Should we turn this off?
My goodness, we haven't even seen
Let's
it yet.
keep this on topic.
We're a few hours away here in my time zone from getting to see the book of Boba Fett. But I wonder, with you guys giggling like that, what is it? What does it sound like?
No, we're here to talk about Lord of the Rings today.
Yeah, we're not.
I know. Okay.
Yeah.
Ennio Morricone versus Hans Zimmer in space on drugs.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a lot going on.
Wow. That sounds great.
To quote
Now-
George Lucas, it's so dense.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh my goodness. Well, this is beautiful. That was a really early demo, and it did evoke very pastoral, excuse me, and maybe a little pastel, but I mean that quality of the Shire, which is so verdant and pastoral and green, that was very evocative in just that little demo. But it did sound a little bit weird and different, and like a 16-bit video game version of it, maybe.
It's
Now-
interesting to hear how clear of a sense Howard has of his orchestral palette, though. You can hear the sounds that will become the telltale sounds of the Shire in their electronic approximations, of course. But you can see that he's not just sort of sketching a tune and then saying, well, I don't know, someone will do something with this. He has a very full musical idea of what to do with these things. So even though you're hearing sort of different avenues with those melodic lines, he knew what he wanted it to sound like. He had a concept that was very solid, very complete.
Now the next track is titled Theatrical Version and Alternate of Out from Bree.
Yeah.
So there's two sort of back-to-back pieces on this track. The first is the theatrical version of the Fellowship leaving Bree, which is not as heavily developed as what you might hear on the complete recordings. And the second piece is some unique Isengard material that we'll talk about in a second.
I'm getting complaints from my friend Allison that my internet is terrible, so my apologies to everybody if I keep clipping in and out. Hi, Allison.
Flavian wants to know, has your book been translated into French or any plans of any of that?
You know, I've gotten that question many, many times over, and my frustrating answer is no. We really wanted to early on, but it just didn't. It just didn't happen. It's a high it's a high budgetary issue to have the whole thing done. The way that we put this book together is it's laid out like an art book. We have all these wonderful sketches from Alan Lee and John Howe, and you had to even we wanted to do an internet version, an iPad version, excuse me, and you just couldn't relay everything out. It was too specific to the original layout. So maybe someday I still would love to do a digital edition at some point, and maybe that would be something where a translation could be done. But for right now, I'm afraid it's English only.
Can you get better internet if we paid $19.99 to hum the soundtrack?
Yeah, I can't afford it.
We've already had trouble with fake Doug on Twitter earlier today. Trying to get people to fake Doug.
Don't give fake Doug any money, please. It seems like a bad idea.
All right, that was a theatrical take.
So just in case anyone did miss it, the Fellowship theme there just has the first 5 notes of the motif because you only have the first 5 members of the Fellowship at that point.
There's a surprising amount of numerology in these scores, and Howard really liked to play with that a little bit.
Is the statement in Out from Bree a French horn and a cor anglaise?
I don't recall because we just talked over it, but it seems very, very likely. Those are 2 instruments that are featured quite a bit in these scores. The cor anglais is the English horn, to use the sort of translated version, even though it's not accurate. It's not a specifically English instrument, but that's the sound of the One Ring.
So this piece that introduces the Isengard material was completely dropped from the final film. I don't think there's any music in this sequence at all until the very end.
Yeah.
So the decision was made just to save this material until later in the film. It's a pretty unique setting of it as well, with some some male chorus underneath, which I don't think appears anywhere in the finished film.
No, it's correct. Yeah.
And this runs right through the initial scene of the orcs tearing down the trees around Orthanc.
This is the text. I don't think it ever made it to any place in the final film. It's a text called "Eat All the World," which is a black speech text written by Philip Aboyans, translated by David Sallow. But I think it's the only singing orcs you ever get.
What does this chatter mean by off-kilter 5/4 beat?
A lot of the Isengard music, because it's supposed to show the conflict between industrialization and the natural world, was put into a 5/4 meter, meaning 5 beats per measure, 5 beats per phrase. So that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's asymmetrical. You have 3 beats and then 2 beats, and then 3 and then 2. Or Howard will flip that a lot of times, 2 and 3 and 2 and 3. But it creates a phrase that doesn't have any sort of beautiful symmetry to it. It's lopsided, and that was sort of the musical equivalent of industrialization as the antithesis of the natural world.
Yeah,
All right,
and yet, on the subject of lopsided material, some of Treebeard's material in The Two Towers is in 7/4, so to give it a sort of slightly lumbering, heavy rhythm.
Right. Treebeard is not, at least at the introduction of the character, the most sort of graceful physical character. He has his presence, but he's sort of creaky and awkward.
This next one is an alternate take to A Flight to the Ford.
This is one of the first pieces that Howard and I discussed about getting in this album. So this is Arwen arriving at the river here, and you'll notice that passage at the end of this, when she does her incantation and the waters come to wash away the ring wraiths, it's an entirely different passage. Chorus gets to do quite a bit of chanting here. And I think this is also a text that was only used here, so it doesn't actually appear in the films or the score in the final version. This text will be literally called "Flood at the Ford of Bruinen." It's a Sindarin text, another Philip Aboyans creation. And it's people have noticed that this is a weird spot for the interaction between the score and the action, that the chorus does sing Arwen's words in the final version. So the text here is also very specific to the on-screen action. The text is, "At your command, the river answers. At your need, the waters rise. Daughter of Elrond, your call is heard." So it's a very literal text. Some of these texts get a bit figurative, but this one is really fairly dead on. This is still the ring wraith music. This is not the Flood at the Ford bit yet. And Jim, I don't know if you're monitoring, but I think we are getting some questions on Twitter as well.
Yeah,
thanks.
Keeping an eye on those.
Oh my goodness, I just had a heart attack.
I'll wait for this next part.
I mean, I'm allowing my mind to go to where the visuals have always been for 20 years, and this music running through my, those familiar images is just stunning.
So if you're listening to the film, the music stops. I think it just dissipates in a couple of seconds. But on this version, it carries on and goes slightly crazy in a minute.
Oh my goodness, wow.
You'll notice that that is quite different from the final version, but it's not all that different from the textures he created for Gandalf the White in the Two Towers. That sort of triplets in the chorus of a chanting sort of effect. So he kind of kept that in his back pocket as a way to represent nature. And now we're into the Arwen music, and that's one of the few examples here of the chorus singing in English in the score.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We'll get another one later on.
Yeah.
Who made the decision to record those chants in Tolkien's languages versus English?
Well, that was a concept for the choral music in general. I think, if I remember correctly, Philippa and Fran were the driving forces behind that. I'm sure everybody was in on the discussion, but I think that came from them in a lot of ways. Howard was very good at writing. He had just finished a score not too long before this, Looking for Richard, where they had translated Shakespeare into Latin. And he was having a lot of fun dealing with these languages in choral writing. And I think it was sort of an extension of some of the ideas he was trying in that.
And for me, none of the villain music peaked as high as that. Maybe because that was the first hit of villain in the trilogy, but that scared me in the theater. And I feel like that for the next 5 movies, like it never got any scarier than that choral arrangement and that music.
It was interesting. There was discussion at the time about Howard's use of the Ringwraith theme in Fellowship of the Ring, and this was shortly after the release of the first score. And people said, well, how can you go on and do 2 more stories when that theme, that villainous music, is at such a high, elevated, anxious pitch? You know, what else can you do? You can't make music that's more stressful and epic than that. And of course, Howard then led to the Two Towers and Return of the King, which expanded the scope immensely and proved that it could be done. But he did lay quite a foundation by making such large dramatic strokes in this first score. Mm-hmm. There is the question, what else can you do? We just have the whole orchestra yell on the microphone. I mean, it's hard to find things when that's your base level for the scope of things.
And a shorter response to that is Howard just saying, "Hold my beer."
Yeah, exactly. Everyone in the chat said that, but here we go. All
right, this is an oddball. This is an oddball. This is one of the very first pieces that was ever created for Lord of the Rings, and almost nothing of this made it into final versions. You can sort of recognize Howard's fingerprints in it, but it doesn't even really sound that much like Lord of the Rings music. It was a very, very early mock-up for some of the Moria music.
Mm-hmm. This is probably the stage that Amazon show is at right now, just kind of hashing out some basic themes.
Yeah. So you can hear the clustering strings. You can hear those sharp punctuating rhythms that Howard likes to use.
Yeah, there's some sort of classic sort of Shaw dissonance and that ascending stacked minor scale thing as well.
Yeah.
Could this be the Durin theme for Amazon show since it was unused?
Sure. I mean, I have a feeling, Howard doesn't generally, assuming that Howard would be involved with such an endeavor, but he doesn't usually come to things and go, "Oh, I've got something here, just pull this out and use it." He's very pure in that he likes to really react to something in a very natural way and then find a musical expression of that.
Yeah. I think his preference would definitely be to write something new and not to delve back into, discarded bits and pieces from the past.
Yeah, I'm not even sure this was originally written to a scene. I don't know about you, Jim, but I've never found any place that it exactly fits. I mean, it could have been an earlier edit, but it may have just been a concept piece too.
I think it's either part of the cave troll sequence or it's when the orcs first sort of burst through the door and into Balin's Tomb. I'm not
But
sure.
I'm not sure that it was written to film. I think it may have been written wild.
You know,
Which
the
would mean
last-
just composed separately. Sorry.
The last third of that, let me bring that up.
Mhm.
Feels very like Hobbit. This feels like it was more in the Hobbit movie.
I see what you're saying, Justin.
It's those long stretching stacking of harmonies that Jim just referenced. Howard doesn't always write in traditional stacks of thirds or stacks of fourths, stacks of fifths, what we think of traditional tonal harmonies. Sometimes he just likes to cluster things up, sometimes tonal things, sometimes just atonal chromatic combination of pitches. So it's what we would call cluster writing in the musical world.
Now this is alternate to the Fighting Uruk-hai.
Yeah. So this is for the introduction of Lurtz. So you'll hear a bit more of that Isengard material with the male chorus again.
Right.
You can still synchronize it with the film if anyone feels like it.
This one does line up, yeah. And
Feels
you
like
get a little
doing
bit more of that "eat all the world" text.
Yeah.
Now, can you describe your book a little bit? Like, do you have a page for this, or like?
Yeah, if you're reading along in the book, this would be on page 394. Actually, we do go through and kind of do a track by track description of the rarities at the end of the book. Some of this music is similar to what you hear in the final version of the last act of Fellowship.
Well, good question from the chat. Did Howard write anything specifically for Lurtz, or was it just Isengard?
Just Isengard. The orcs in this score don't really get any. I mean, I guess I should say, in general, in the Lord of the Rings scores, there's not a lot of themes that are specific to individual characters. There are a few, so I don't mean to say that never happens. But it's much more a geographical or anthropological score. It's what part of Middle Earth you're from, or it's what culture you're related to. There isn't a Frodo theme. There isn't a Legolas theme. It's very rare that there are individual character themes. And even when there are, there's material that is associated with Aragorn, but it's sort of more related to the Fellowship material. It's an extrapolation there.
And then later on, it's more related to Gondor. So it's always tied to either a group or a culture.
Yeah. So that went with the orcs for sure. That they were always related to where they were from, whether they're from Isengard, whether they're from whatever part of the map they are. It's a great way to keep track of the storytelling. What made Howard create a theme for Gandalf in The Hobbit? I just thought that's a great question. I think it was because Gandalf is a character that doesn't have a specific association with a culture. There actually is a little bit of material in the first Hobbit score that's just wizard music that he gets a bit, Radagast gets a bit. But in the Hobbit scores, Gandalf is much more of an interactive character. So to keep track of the storytelling and where he is, what he's doing, it made sense to give him a little kind of curly Q motif that he has. There is a specific Gollum song. Yeah, I see. Sorry, I'm reading the chat instead of talking to everyone.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in some of the Hobbit commentaries we did, that there is a lot more in the way of character-specific material in that trilogy, just because it's a very different type of story.
Yeah, those stories aren't so much about locations on the map, I don't think. So we're going to get into the Argonath alternate here, and this is one of my favorites on the entire album. This is the one that uses, in the final version of the score of the film, you hear the history of the ring theme as they pass between the statues. The ring having made progress and passed that far out of that part of Middle Earth. Here it's the Gondor theme, big, beautiful, extended statement of the Gondor theme, representing the kings of old.
Yeah.
And it's a really beautiful setting of the theme, I think.
little snippet of LSR's Oath, which you'll hear Aragorn sing at the end of The Return of the King in 2 films' time.
Yep. So again, it was decided that it was just a little too much exposition. You didn't really need to know about Gondor in this amount of detail at this point in the story. So it's a beautiful, beautiful setting, but it is sort of noble and strong. And I think there's also the urge to keep things a little more mysterious here. Now, this follow-up passage, which is probably my favorite part of the whole thing, this is more mysterious. But putting the History of the Ring theme sets the whole thing in a different light.
Yeah, the sort of the history of the Ring theme is quite interesting as well, because originally it was nowhere near as prevalent in the film. The decision to sort of move it to the prologue and some of the earlier scenes was made quite late in the day.
There's a bit of trivia as well. If you listen to the old commentary track on the original releases of these films, Howard refers to this section as a Gondorian theme, because he was thinking back to the original version of this composition that had the Gondor theme in there.
Oh,
so
okay.
If you hear him refer to the History of the Ring as, well, this might be a Gondorian theme or something, he's thinking of the other version of that composition. So that explains that long-standing mystery.
Okay,
That prompted years of over-analysis on certain film music scores.
Yes.
People in chat are remarking on liberal use of French horn. Was this movie? Did Howard grow to love the French horn just for this movie, or did he always like the French horn?
He always loved the French horn. I mean, go back to The Fly, going to Looking for Richard. Even things like the score. He's a wonderful writer for brass players. My wife, as a matter of fact, if I can mention her for a moment, met Howard when she was a student at Berkeley, when he went to conduct a concert of his music, and she's a French horn player, and he conducted her in the orchestra, and went up to him afterward and said, "Hi, I'm Doug's girlfriend." And yeah, cool. It was an auspicious debut, and he said, "Oh, you're part of the family." So it was kind of a cool thing. But he's a wonderful composer for French horn, for everything really, but French horn certainly.
Thank you, Emily, in the chat room, in our Zoom chat, who's posting the link to bookshop.org. Again, you can pick up Doug's book, the Music of Lord of the Rings, on Amazon UK, on bookshop.org. Might even be, you might be able to order it through your local bookshop. Who knows where they get these books? It's on its 6th or 7th printing edition. It comes with the music CD, which includes a lot of the music that we are playing tonight. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And you know, just get the book where you can. It is worth every penny. And these little tidbits that we're talking through today are just a little sample of the text that is in this large hardcover book. So we're really excited. And if you've just joined us late on YouTube and Facebook and Twitch, if you go to YouTube, there's the link to the Zoom where you can listen to all the music with us. But it seems that a few of you are staying on the regular things and watching along at home. So let's go to another mock-up. This looks like it's Arwen's song, but it's a mock-up played on what?
This will be synclavier again, I believe, right? This is an early version of Arwen's song, Wenwen and Een. So this was never performed by live performers. The song was changed before it ever made it into a film, but Arwen's song was a tricky one to place. It was written for the Two Towers originally, or intended to be written. This is the draft that would have been in the Two Towers. And then when they came up with a different version of the song, they had it originally in Return of the King, where she sees the vision of her future son. And then it was moved from there. They decided that didn't work. They moved it to the Houses of Healing. Oh, Voice of the Rings just bought the book. Thank you, Voice of the Rings. Thank you. This was a very mysterious, ethereal concept for what her song might be.
I think the footage in question was just one of those pieces that ended up being pushed from film 2 to film 3 and back again.
Right. Yeah, the Vision of the Sun. Yeah.
Yeah. We do have a few Twitter questions as well, which I will get to in a minute. Thank you for
cool.
the reminder.
And then after this, we're going to roll into the final Arwen.
So there is a good Arwen question while we're here, actually. Is there a special reason that why Arwen is practically the only character represented more than once with English lyrics?
Well, in terms of music in the score, so I'm not going to count end credit songs, she might be the only one. I'm not sure anyone else is ever represented in the score as a score with English lyrics.
I suppose it's a cultural connection again, isn't it, for the character?
Yeah. I mean, she was an elf character that had a relationship with a human character. So I think it creates a sense of relatability. Probably, again, to be commercial about things, it helps establish her as the love interest, quote unquote, of the stories, even though she was certainly a much more complex and interesting character than just a love interest. This is the complete Arwen song, by the way, which I think only a snippet of this ended up being used, but you hear the whole song here. We had to get this all cleared with Liv Tyler to make sure she was okay with it.
Many different versions of this as well, lots of different mixes.
So this is her singing?
This is Liv Tyler singing, that's right.
Oh, wow.
Liv, did you know that? I didn't.
You didn't know that? There's a link in the chat to buy the book.
Oh my God.
I mean, the daughter of Aerosmith frontman Steven Tyler should be able to sing, but
yeah,
what a way to debut.
So if I remember correctly, this full version was intended for the scene when the scene was in the Two Towers. That's the vision of Arwen's son.
Yeah, it actually would have started slightly before the Vision of the Sun. I think it started with the vision of Aragorn's grave or the discussion of his mortality, something along those lines.
Something like that.
The lyrics do reference that a bit. There's past are the years, nothing will change. You came one day, the next you will depart. So there was, Aragorn's mortality was sort of the subject here. And that was, of course, in the Gwenwyn and Ian lyric, not the English lyrics that you can hear. Time and tide will sweep all away.
This was at one point titled "A Shadow Lies Between Us," but seems to just now be Arwen's song. So.
Right.
There's a bit of controversy on the new 4K box set when they show that flash forward of Liv's of Arwen's child and the grave of Vigo. That they've desaturated all the color out of it, so it's black and white, and they've softened the edges with a blur. So it's the filmmaker has made a choice. Peter Jackson made a choice for this new 4K edition to make that more of a dream state.
It seems to be a deliberate artistic decision to bring these things in line with The Hobbit.
Yeah, I think all the vision scenes are sort of had a similar look to them now, where they used to be a little more diverse in the past.
Yeah. Next is Emmen Mule.
Yeah.
Alternate take.
Okay. So there's the Two Towers now.
Yeah. Thoroughly into Two Towers. So it's from the opening of the Frodo and Sam stuff at the beginning of Two Towers. A little bit of this made it to the complete recordings. We used the other version and then a few bars from this, but it's a great composition. We wanted to get the full thing out. I can remember this was certainly early on in my writing career and wanting to make sure that I phrased everything appropriately to please the powers that be. So I can remember asking Howard when we were figuring out how to discuss this composition on the complete recordings, and there was this alternate that we're using some measures from it, but how do you want me to talk about that? And I remember he pulled me aside and said, just tell the truth, don't make stuff up, just tell people what happened, which I thought was actually kind of a nice moral lesson from showbiz. You don't get many of those.
I think
I
it's
wonder if Howard Shore scored the Arwen and Aragorn and Lorien scene that never made it into any DVD Blu-ray extras. No, I don't believe he did. I know there's a lot of legendary unused scenes of things, weddings and young Aragorn and things like that, but I don't think any of those ever made it to the scoring part of a post-production. I don't think he wrote any music for those.
No, I don't. The two towers seemed to be in more of an editorial flux than any of the other pictures during scoring.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. There was
Certainly,
time.
yeah. Well, of course, with the production limits on time for the second of a trilogy, but people are still asking me, what about the Arwen fighting at Helm's Deep scene? Was there anything Howard wrote regarding Arwen and her fighting style, her showing up at Helm's Deep?
I don't believe so. I'm sure the lyrics would have been in English, but other than that,
Yeah.
I don't know. No, I don't think any of those things got scored.
Okay.
Usually, by the time things would get to the stage of that would be like an early post-production type of thing. Even if they didn't know where all the pieces were, they usually knew what all the pieces were. That's not always true. But some of those things just the ideas disappeared before they got any music set to them.
You guys in the chat, you do know that Legolas and Gimli don't get married until after the events of Lord of the Rings. That's for the sequel trilogy.
It's the Amazon show, isn't it?
The Amazon show is already woke enough to have Legolas.
It's like an Ernie and Bert thing. It's just them living in an apartment.
You keep leaking spoilers like that, Doug, and
I'm
Amazon's
sorry.
going to be around your house in the next 5 minutes.
Sorry, Jeff.
Funny.
So this is wrapping up on the M and Mule, but the next one, let's set up a bit because it's such an important theme. This is a mock-up. Is it the first mock-up of the Rohan Fanfare?
It is the first mock-up of the Rohan Fanfare, and it's actually pretty much exactly as you know it. This is one of the themes that didn't have a lot of tweaking going on. So what you hear here is very, very similar to the music you hear under King Theoden sort of returning to his senses. It's just the early version of everything when it was still performed again on that synclavier, that early electronic instrument. But it's not like the Shire theme where it takes a few different twists and turns. It's pretty close to what you eventually hear.
The and let me just give some historical context before we hit play on the first mock-up of Rohan. It has become such an iconic part of Lord of the Rings history that within the first note what you're listening to. And we have to remind people that, Cliff, we did not hear this until the second movie. Everyone had fallen in love with Fellowship of the Ring and the amazing themes of the Shire and everything else, and the ring race. Mm-hmm. And to think of like all of that work done in Fellowship and celebrated and nominated for Oscars, and then we get to Two Towers and we're hearing this theme that we haven't heard before. It's like it's stacking up on greatness. It's hard for me to describe, like, hearing the Rohan music for the first time a year after the first movie, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's this much more. There's this much more to this world. I don't know, Cliff, did you get any of that reaction when the Two Towers came out?
Oh yeah, very much so. Very much so. In fact, there was a lot of immediate discussion when the third film came out that everyone said, oh, the Two Towers is still my favorite. I love the way Peter wrapped up this trilogy, but Two Towers is still the best. That's common. That's a very common conventional wisdom in fandom. But why is that so? I'm sure that it can be heavily attributed to that sensation of the second film fulfilling the promise of the first, that it was a very, very big canvas, a very big fantasy world, and it was getting bigger in the second film, getting the canvas to go even wider to other spaces musically and visually. It was a fulfilled promise. and that was to the great, credit to the hardworking cast and crew, and especially Howard. What he did, bringing in Treebeard's theme. Are we really going to hear an early version of a Treebeard theme? Do you have something like that for us
Oh,
tonight?
it's coming up. Yeah, it's on there.
Oh my goodness!
Well,
So excited.
before we
I was just going to say, I think the comment that Doug has made about the Two Towers before, and that I agree with, is that it's really where sort of the Howard Shore's canvas expands considerably.
Yeah,
it's
that's
where I
what
understood what he was going for with these scores. He sent me Two Towers. I think I had the music about 2 or 3 months, something like that. I had some of the music before 2-3 months before the film was released. And I think I saw the film almost a month before it came out. And it was where everything made sense to me. I'd loved Fellowship. I'd absolutely adored it. But I have to admit, I never completely got inside Howard's head enough to understand what was going to happen and how he was establishing these themes and these cultures and these bits of geography, and how he would then play them against each other, and how that's really that compare and contrast element of his scoring is what made this world feel so full and so lived in. And I can remember after the Two Towers, it was maybe the most revelatory experience of any of these scores for me, because it's where I suddenly felt like, as Jim just said, like, oh, I see what you're doing. It isn't just a beautiful theme for the Shire. It's beautiful because it is this, and because it isn't this, and these are different, and it makes the world feel complete. That's where it became significantly more Tolkien-esque in my mind, I guess.
No, I think on a different note, The Return of the King is about bringing everything together.
Right.
There's much more sort of contrapuntal interweaving of themes from different cultures.
Score 1 is establishing. Score 2 is expanding. Score 3 is bringing everything to a fine point and wrapping it up.
And you really feel that. Well, our chat room, we've got some celebrated people in here. John D. Ruddy is a big YouTuber. Everyone should follow him. But he's in the chat room and he's asking, does this mean the Two Towers was only recorded after Fellowship came out? The Rohan theme is the Rohan theme that we're about to hear. Was it first recorded after the Fellowship came out?
That's a very good question, John.
There was no overlap with any of these, really. I mean, if a theme needed to be used in a prior installment, such as the Gondor theme, then yeah, that would have been written to be ready for Fellowship and for Two Towers, and then focused upon in Return of the King. But there wasn't an overlap in the post-production schedules in that way. So Howard scored film 1 in 2001, film 2 in 2002, film 3 in 2003. The only bit of overlap would have been Howard would have been still working on Fellowship Extended Edition when he was getting ready for Two Towers. So there was some overlap in that way. But
do we have a written date? Like, when was the Rohan theme? When was this mock-up recorded, I guess?
I'm sure we could dig that out of the archives, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Good question, John D. Reddy. You stumped the experts. And ladies and gentlemen,
it would have been written in either very, very late 2001 or more likely in early 2002. I can tell you that. But
that's what we're getting at. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here is the first mock-up of the Rohan theme.
he's in discussion about how these things went down with Oscar nominations too, which I can speak a little bit about if people are curious.
Yeah, that was just a big mess that year.
I'm very curious about that story. Yes, please illuminate for us. Yes.
Well, it was interesting. I was mostly working with Howard at that point, but I was also employed on occasion by somebody at that time who was a publicist named Ronnie Chasen. Dearly departed Ronnie Chasen, absolutely bizarre story if anyone cares to look it up, but I don't really want to get into it here. but she was part of the campaign to get the Two Towers an Oscar nomination. And it wasn't originally disqualified because the rule had gone into effect that if a score relied too heavily on pre-existing themes, it wouldn't qualify as something new. It wouldn't be qualified to be nominated for an Oscar. So it was originally, the Two Towers was disqualified using that rule. At the 11th hour and probably 59 minutes, the case was made that it had enough original material. And I was part of that process of showing what the themes are, how much is really quoting the old Shire theme and how much is really the new Rohan theme. And, Jim would have loved it because he always likes the statistics on these things probably more than I do. But I was part of that process, and it did qualify then for the Oscar shortly before voting closed. But at that point, most people already cast their votes, and it didn't really have as much of an effect as we would have liked it to have. So it was temporarily disqualified, then qualified, but I suppose you could say the damage had been done at that point.
Right.
But that's people say, well, why is Two Towers the only one that didn't win any Oscars for the score? I think that's probably why.
My favorite.
The cue sheets that they submit for awards consideration now are much more complicated as a result. If you look at something like the cue sheets for The Rise of Skywalker, everything is sort of accounted for in terms of percentages of existing material. It's slightly crazy.
I think I had to type up a very, very, very early version of the music of the Lord of the Rings films, the book, which was only talk about music from 2 scores because the third one hadn't been written yet. But that was sort of circulated around Hollywood and made the case that it should be nominated.
And they still, the Academy still doesn't get soundtrack score correctly. In fact, just a couple years ago, one of my favorite composers of recent times, Johan Johansson, had done the Mandy score with Nicolas Cage, and everyone said it was his best ever. He had done Arrival, and he was on track to do Blade Runner 2049 and Dune, and and then he unfortunately passed, and due to a technicality of like them releasing the iTunes version of the movie, like 2 weeks early, for reason disqualified it for an Oscar run. So everyone wanted to vote for Johan Johansson for the Mandy soundtrack, and it was disqualified. So we just talked to Cliff. We just talked to Sean Astin a week ago, like literally 7 days ago. Mm-hmm. And he said when he first got the scripts to Two Towers, he read that speech and was like, I'm going to win an Oscar with this. It just seems like the powers that be, I don't know what happened, but the Two Towers in particular was bungled when it came to Oscars all the way through. Acting, music, it was just nothing went right.
I know that when Fellowship came out and it was such a huge hit, and it sort of confirmed that this massive gamble by New Line was a good idea after all. I think the celebration carried over, through the would have been the 2001 Oscars, which of course was in the spring winter of 2002, and they kind of got around to late winter, early spring, and thought, oh wait, we have to do another one of these things. So I think everything was a little bit compressed because they were so thrilled at the reception for Fellowship.
I think it always struggles a little because it is just that middle film that doesn't really have a beginning, doesn't have an end, and I think as a result, Academy voters are not quite sure exactly what to do with it.
It's the best of the trilogy. I mean, it really is on all aspects. And
I agree, certainly. But by the time the second one came out and had the absolute quality that the first one had, then everybody who was in the voting Academy realized, then the third one's going to be the capper. We might as well just reserve our votes and give that to the third film. And by that time, it felt inevitable to happen.
Well, Jim is disqualified from answering this, but what score won Best Score instead of the Two Towers? I know Jim knows, so I'm not going to let him answer.
Well, 2002 was a big year because that's the year We had a Star Wars sequel, Star Wars Episode 2. Did we have The Matrix 2 and 3 that year? It was just a big. It was a big year for geek films. I remember, like 2002 was like, oh my gosh, the second Lord of the Rings movie versus the second Star Wars movie. Who's gonna win?
Yeah, the score they won is a wonderful score by Elliot Goldenthal for the Frida Kahlo movie. It's a wonderful score, but The Two Towers is still played regularly and sort of lives on in both popular and art culture. So we place a lot of stock in these awards, and certainly those of us that have any sort of connection to that world think of them as very final words on things.
The chat room got it right. Everyone said Frida.
Frida, yeah, it's a great score. It's a wonderful film, wonderful score.
Yeah, but you want to talk about big years for geeks? You had 2002. You had Two Towers, Spider-Man, Attack of the Clones, Harry Potter. like these are all-star, all-time greatest geek movies.
Yeah, the early 2000s had a ton of great film music being written back then. I think we all get nostalgic for that.
The 2 Matrix sequels in 2003.
My memory would not have clicked back to Frida as the film that won that year. I would not have remembered.
Well, it was the score. I don't know if the film won quite as much, but the score won. It's great.
Excuse me. I meant to say that.
Yeah.
I misspoke yet again. Now, what are we listening to now?
I believe we're getting into the eaves of Fangorn here.
Yeah, so these early parts of The Two Towers went through a lot of re-editing, a moderate amount of rescoring, and things just kept moving around. So this is a much more condensed version.
Some of our Three Hunters music here.
I mean, that's it. I'm in. I'm so in.
Yeah, and keeping the numerology thing going, the Fellowship theme is all in 3/4 here because you're down to 3 remaining members of the Fellowship.
Ah, right.
What do you Elf-I-C?
I love that John Ruddy said, "Not idly do the leaves of Lorien fall." Okay, thank you. Matthew says, "Rest in peace, Boromir, who would have been an excellent 4th hunter." Yes, he would have.
You have to put the theme back in 4/4 though.
Back into Isengard.
Oh, I love this stuff so much.
See, Barad-dûr was never as scary as Isengard because of this theme. They're at the Black Gate with the Tower of Sauron behind them, and it didn't feel as threatening as this. So this is an alternate take to a film scoring session.
Yes, yeah. Some of this is probably some of the same takes that you hear in the film, the beginning of it. So usually these album versions are edited together from multiple takes or bits of multiple takes. Yeah.
That section was different. That's slightly longer than what was there.
So they might have scored to a different rough cut of the movie, and that's what makes it an alternate.
Exactly. Yeah. So what you'll hear coming up next is some alternate underscore for the discussion that Merry and Pippin have about the trees when they've been captured by the Uruk-hai. So in the final version of the film, I think you hear the nature theme here, but this version relies more on the end material. And then we go into the
Kathy says there are certain themes that are dangerous to listen to while driving. You step too hard on the gas.
That's probably true, yeah.
What about them legs? This is Jed Brophy's big hero moment, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Just a bit off the flank.
So I think we actually have two versions of the Rohirrim decimating
Yes, yeah,
the
we
Uruk-hai
kind
here,
of
back to back.
put both of them in here, yeah. Now, Valinar, that's different.
Thank you to everyone in the chat asking for links to buy the book. And thank
Oh,
you,
that's great.
Hobbit,
Thank you
for sharing.
We did a little bit of a cheat here. I'll talk about this in a second.
This is one of those sequences that was scored and recorded 3 times, and none of the versions are in the film.
Crazy string clusters there.
Cliff, did you cringe when the orcs have menus?
No.
So that is, I don't mean to interrupt the menu discussion.
No. No. Please.
But that's a little bit of a creation that we put together where you can hear 2 alternate versions at once. So there's one after the other. We didn't want to have to repeat an entire, 4.5 minute composition just to get to a different ending, 2 different versions. So that doesn't actually match up with the final version of the film or an earlier version of the film. We created that a little bit just to have a way of getting that music out there.
Here's another mock-up.
This is the Ent mock-up. This is a very different take on the Ent music. You will literally hear the sounds of branches in this one, or at least the electronic approximation. Treebeard almost turned into Yoda there for a second.
Oh, wow.
This is a little more Cronenbergian.
Right, yeah.
A little, yes.
I imagine this would have worked for the first appearance of Treebeard, but it was so... There's our branches. Sort of a harmonic chorus type of sound. It's sort of so ominous sounding that I think it would have been hard to turn him back into a friendly character.
Treebeard arrives at the table for naked lunch. I guess.
That's right.
Oh my goodness.
Treebeard with a healthy helping of bug powder.
Oh, bug powder. That's right.
Yeah.
We just need some Ornette Coleman on top.
So the concept for Treebeard was always to get some wooden sounds in the orchestra. In the final version, it's contrabassoon, log drums, bass marimba, things like that. And here, it sounds like they're literally playing with, the sounds of branches or thin pieces of wood or something like that. You can hear it right there. Almost sounds like feet on a forest floor.
Wow.
Cassidy says that can't wait for the music of the Hobbit films to be published. I feel the same way, Cassidy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's been gestating for nearly as long as the music of the Lord of the Rings was.
It's been born. It's just on one laptop. Well, 2. You've got it too.
Please, with the world is ready. Amazon, make it happen.
Yeah, well, as I said,
Amazon.
We're bringing a book publisher into the picture, so you never know.
That's right. You people do that thing, so let's do that.
Okay, so that's the end of the Two Towers section, but we're going to get into the Return of the King, and maybe Jim, if I could ask you to talk about the recording process for this. This is the trailer music from The Return of the King.
Is
Ooh, okay.
The only piece that was recorded
one of two. One of two, actually.
One of two. Is there another one? Okay, sorry.
There is another one. I'll mention the other one in a minute. So this is effectively there's two different halves to this. The first piece is an edit of existing material with a couple of newly recorded overlays. But the rest of it was all recorded using a process that's known as striping, where every section of the orchestra is recorded individually, just to give more control over mixing. So instead of having everyone in the room at the same time, you'd record the strings, and then the strings would all go home. You'd record trombones and other brass. Then you do the winds. Then anything more eclectic at the end of the day. It's quite a lengthy process, but gives much more control over the finished product.
It gives more control of the finished product. It does, however, I will say, create a much more commercial sound. It's more of a studio orchestra. The musicians aren't responding to each other as they would in a symphony situation, or everybody in the same room at the same time. For a trailer, it works great. Doing the entire score like that, I think, creates a bit of a stilted performance.
And this is where the newly recorded stuff starts. This was all written and recorded specifically for the trailer. So it was recorded during the main Return of the King sessions.
Amazon, we're giving you the playbook. If you want to impress everybody, unique music for your first trailer.
Great idea. That used to be much more common in showbiz.
Oh, look, there you go.
You recognize this as sort of an adaptation of the music where they first get to Minas Tirith.
Yes.
But more trailerized. No Dies Irae in any of these scores. People have asked about that for years. There is no Dies Irae in any of the Lord of the Rings. The Latin, traditional Catholic religions and things like that don't exist specifically in this world. I don't say that they haven't influenced it, but in terms of the music, nope, not at all.
Before we jump into the mock-up of the Gondor theme, there was a question in the chat about Éomer returning from Harvest or something, and let's see, discuss the alternate take from Two Towers, where we first see Éomer returning from the slaughter. It's only in the theatrical, but not on the CD.
Turning from the slaughter in the Two Towers.
Meaning the slaughter when Osgiliath was overrun and his body is being dragged back.
Éomer. No, we're still in Rohan, aren't we?
Yeah, that'd be back.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about which composition that would be.
So Éomer comes back, and it was like
son?
5 guys, and he's like, it was a slaughter,
Oh, I thought someone was talking about Faramir for a moment.
Éomer arriving at Edoras with Theodred's body.
With Theodred's body.
Oh, okay.
And I guess there's some music in there that's in the theatrical movie, but not on the CDs.
So the theatrical transition when we see Éomer arrive at Edoras is, I believe, on the complete recordings, because it's one of those small pieces on the Two Towers that gets repeated twice because it appears in 2 different compositions. The only piece I can think of that doesn't appear, the theatrical piece, is when Grima banishes Éomer. There's a shorter version of that in the theatrical cut, because the footage of him showing the contract with Theoden's signature on the bottom is not there. It's very similar material. It's just slightly shorter.
Huh.
It is important to point out. People always say, "Well, there's 2 notes missing from this, or there's this missing from that." when you create these scores, meaning creating the album versions of them, you don't simply take the music as it was mixed and cut into the film and present it like that. The one exception, very notable in the soundtrack community, was they did that with the Phantom Menace, the Star Wars, the first of the prequels, where they literally just took the film mix and slapped it onto discs and released it. And it creates a very non-musical product, because in a final film, there's always little micro edits, or this is clipped out, or in some cases the composer was asked to repeat a measure to accommodate additional footage, but it doesn't really make musical sense to them. When it goes to the album, if there's time, and certainly, you know, when it's released in deluxe format, there's more time, the composer is able to sort of reinstate some of these musical choices. So a lot of times people will be upset that, well, you know, there's a measure missing here. Well, the composer might have been asked by the filmmaker to put that in at the last second, or they had to editorially create that. And that's not really something that the composer envisioned as part of that musical presentation. So in an album like this, sometimes we go back to what that musical presentation was meant to have been. If you're a musician, I think you usually understand where the composer is coming from. If you're a fan of the film and want to recreate that experience, I can understand that sometimes that's frustrating, but I do think it's the composer's right to sort of recreate how they originally envisioned some of these things. We used to jokingly call the live to projection concerts the composer's revenge edition, because Howard used to be able to get in some of the music that was cut out of things and, you know, reinstate original ideas. He didn't want to do that too much, because he tried to be very respectful of the fact that people were coming to hear, you know, they wanted the experience of what they experienced in the theater. So he would try to, you know, give it a little, take a little.
Yeah.
But, you know, as a composer, your concern is often with the musical fidelity. I don't know if I say more so, but at least as much so as the dramatic fidelity.
And for a little historical perspective, you mentioned the Phantom Menace, Star Wars, you know, where they just slapped the theatricals on a disc. It's hard to describe just how terrified we hardcore fans were as the 3 Lord of the Rings movies came out and their soundtracks released before the movies. And anyone that had read the books knows what happens, and like, he knows who dies and who doesn't and everything like that. Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, they put on their track title Qui-Gon's Noble End. And they Star Wars spoiled its big dramatic death 6 months before the movie came out by putting Qui-Gon's Noble End as the track title on the CD.
I thought the track title was Qui-Gon's Funeral. Wasn't that the actual
Yeah,
track?
they're both on them.
Yeah, they're both on.
One led to the other.
My goodness.
And it was just like, how could they had hyped up like, we're gonna see Jedi in their peak, Liam Neeson, like this is gonna be great, and then oh he dies. Okay, so everyone going into Lord of the Rings, like, oof, what's like, are they gonna show Boromir's Noble End, you know, on the track titles? So these discussions do happen at the production level of like, all right, what do we call these songs? So I imagine Howard had some influence on that.
I can remember way back in the day, I spoke with Danny Elfman after the release of one of the Spider-Man scores, and I was asking about some inconsistency or some weirdness on the album or something. And he told me, I've got to tell you, the record companies think that these things are bought by about 9 nerds and that's it. Nobody cares. So it's a very uphill battle to try to convince people that there is a public appreciation for this music and for the presentation of it. I do think that's become more well known. Unfortunately, the quality of the music perhaps has changed over the last several years, where it's not even that level of musicianship anymore. But I do think it's these live concerts and you know, record companies certainly have changed a lot in the last few years with digital downloads and streaming and all these services. So there is more of a respect for the presentation of these things. But it's tricky. It really was just seen as a very niche, nerdy thing that who cares? You know, if one guy's gonna tell somebody that Qui-Gon dies, nobody cares.
Yeah. Never underestimate the fans. All right, here is
Yeah.
a mock-up, an early mock-up of the Gondor theme.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we got a Twitter question on this one. That you will hear a little bit of the sound of pan flutes, which became used not in this theme, but elsewhere in the score. The idea was the music of ancient Rome, or at least the Hollywood approximation of that. So you can hear those open fifths and that brassy tromping thing.
Mm-hmm.
Harmonization is a bit different, but you can recognize the theme.
It's not entirely dissimilar to some of the unused stuff from the Fellowship prologue.
Right, right. There's our pan flute sound. Yeah. There's a shout out to La La Land Records in the chat. I agree with that. They're fantastic.
Wow, listen to that.
Yeah.
I never thought I would hear anything like that.
Very whimsical.
Yeah, it is a more whimsical sound, and maybe it was a little bit too twee for what Gondor eventually ended up feeling like. But
I think the usage
again here where he's starting his thought process.
Yeah, I mean the final use of the pan flute is probably a bit more subtle than this. This is quite on the nose.
Yeah,
I'm getting visions of like a Miyazaki Gondor.
Sure.
This is the bit from when Gandalf arrives in Gondor.
I think that was strictly a theme concept, so I don't know that that was written.
Oh yeah, this was a mock-up. This was a mock-up of the Gondor theme. So this is just trying to find it. You know what's interesting going through this with you guys is, you know, many of us have watched Peter Jackson's Beatles documentary, 9 hours of it, and just see the process of creation for the music of the Beatles, and now to listen to this and listen to these mock-ups and have a visual of like how music is banged out of, you know, the instruments. It's fascinating.
Well, it's an interesting topic of discussion, the sort of documentary footage piece, because Doug and I were having a conversation the other day about some of the material that we have sort of regarding the creation of Into the West. The song from The Return of the King. There's a lot of recordings of sort of meetings between Howard Shore and Fran Walsh and Peter Jackson, and it would be fascinating material to get out there somehow.
We originally had a little audio documentary that we're going to include with the Rarities. It didn't really make sense when it became more of a you know, most of it is a very album-like presentation. We do have some interview tracks at the end. But it was a songwriting session with Howard and Fran, and I think Philippa may have stepped in for a moment. I can't remember. But they were a guitar player at first and a harp player eventually, and just sort of workshopping ideas, which is not at all dissimilar from what you saw in the Beatles documentary. You can hear little melodic fragments flying around. They sort of both came with some ideas prepared and some conversation of how to, you know, work ideas together. Excuse me. But it just didn't really work with the overall concept of the Rarities. It is a super cool little documentary. I think Jim and I were trying to find what we ever considered the final edit just the other day. I think we had like an 8.5 minute edit. I think there's another 11.5 minute edit. So it's not a 6 hour documentary, of course. But it was a cool glimpse of how, when Howard wasn't working as an orchestral composer, when he was working in more of a songwriter capacity of exactly how that played out.
Yeah. From a more sort of general sort of score writing and recording perspective, there's an excellent little mini documentary on the limited edition Return of the King single CD, And there's a longer version of that too, which was shown, I think, once. Way back in 2000. Was that 2009 or 10? It was a long time ago anyway. When they did.
It was after the Fellowship Radio City performances, yeah.
Yes, Fellowship of the Ring at Radio City. It was a documentary directed by Howard Shore's wife, who's a documentary filmmaker in her own right. So I think some of the shorter version of that is on YouTube. If anyone wants to track that down, I'll post the link in the chat.
It's a wonderful piece, yeah. And I think we're getting into the Muster of Rohan now, right?
Alternate take.
Yeah, this is one of our more indulgent tracks on the album. It's a long track. There's some alternate Rivendell stuff in the middle of it. It's not all that different, but the ending of it is so wonderful. It was impossible to not include it. The alternate ending. So you hear a lot of familiar material here, and then it's.
And again, an alternate take. When you see any music CD that says an alternate take, it might be because the movie that they scored to changed in the edit. So they had to go back and re-record.
Yeah. So in the Two Towers, it was like the first two reels, the first maybe 40 minutes of the film that kept moving around. For the Return of the King, it seemed to be the whole sort of Dun Harrow and Paths of the Dead sequence. There's a lot of different bits and pieces that changed in this sequence.
Matthew says this is one of his favorite tracks on this collection because how much of it encompasses, how much it includes.
This was some of the material when we knew that we were doing this book. You know, the first two scores, we were sort of just figuring out, well, what are we going to do with all this material that we're collecting? And by this point, I was allowed to go to the recording sessions and sit in with the London Philharmonic and things like that. And it was some of the music in here, there's an odd variation of the Fellowship theme. And at one point, Howard announced to the orchestra, listen to this, Doug's going to love this part. And I think I might have slightly and quietly lost my mind.
There is a comment from Mono on the chat saying what's really missing on the Rarities is the 21st century chorus parody medley.
Oh man, did we record that?
I don't know.
I don't know if we did. We should have. The women with fake beards lyrics.
Lothlorien?
So this is for the reveal of Anduril.
Oh, yes, he found it. Mono found the choral medley. So sorry.
So if you listen to the version of this either on the original album or in the film, it will go from Rivendell material into some Gondor material, but there's no Gondor material in this version at all. It's just Rivendell.
Some strange settings of the Rivendell material. So this is the case where I think the end of this composition didn't necessarily go with a different version of the film. It may have been a little different, but I think it was more a question of just the tone musically. I think it was redone for musical reasons more than filmic reasons. Were any of these unused tracks available to be used in any of the video games which were released at that time? We got that question on Twitter as well. Yeah, they had, the games were in development while the films were in development. So sometimes it was delivered to us what you have right now. And if you had version 4 of scene X and you ended it up getting to version 7, well, scene 4 is what, or version 4, excuse me, is what got delivered to the video game developers at that point in the process. So yeah, sometimes it would happen.
Yeah, there are definitely snippets of things in video games and DVD menus that that appeared long before they appeared on the Rarities album.
Some of the material appeared before it appeared on the complete recordings also. It was in video games. I remember The Watcher in the Water, you could get through some video game way back in the day, but of course everybody sat there with a tape recorder and tried to pull it out.
This is slightly different. There's a few extra bars in here.
Right. setting of that theme. Excuse me.
Is any of this in the video games? Do you guys know the official licensed video games?
This particular composition?
Any of this music? Like, do you know if the EA licensed?
Yeah, we were just
I
saying
believe
that.
so, yeah.
They would grab some of these things depending on where it was in the process. So sometimes they got alternate versions by accident, just as a matter of the process.
Hmm.
This is a passage that never really gets messaged on, mentioned in people's best of list or anything. But I love this part of the score. I think it's fantastic. The variety in here, the sort of mounting tension but heroism of things. I think it's a fantastic section. It's very unappreciated. Underappreciated, I shouldn't say unappreciated.
This is the muster of Rohan.
Yeah.
Then we're gonna roll into Siege of Gondor. Right.
Oh, wow. Here we
Yeah.
go.
That amazing Lydian setting of the Rohan theme. It's just
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So the ending is the same. The journey is quite different.
Mhm. Wow. That's so remarkable.
Yeah, it's a great
Um,
composition and a really wonderful part of the musical storytelling. I think it's a cool section.
Indeed.
And the Siege of Gondor alternate.
Oh, wow.
So this is sort of scaled down and restructured, but it's a nice chance to hear an alternate sort of structure for Howard Shore action music, for lack of a better term.
So there's a lot of commonalities with the final version again, but it's an interesting example of what just sort of toning down the orchestration and dialing things back a bit can do.
Yeah. It's always so key with these things. I mean, they're trying to find the drama that works for the scene by itself and the drama that works for that moment in a very large piece of storytelling. So sometimes that takes some reworking.
Ooh.
This is pure Howard Shore here, isn't it?
It
Those
sure
rhythmic
is.
strings under the bassoon line.
It's interesting. The final version goes much bigger in some places. You've got the
Right.
Mordor sort of descending thirds under this. And other pieces are taken in the other direction completely.
See, Nikki's dog is enjoying the music, so that's good.
Very hobbity.
As example of how to pull the music back to get some important dialogue out.
Man, those two are good. Must have Rohan seen. But then
we're getting into the big stuff now. The Shield Maiden of Rohan. This is an interesting version. So the theatrical version of this was not on the original album release. By the time we got around to doing the complete recordings, this composition had been replaced by the extended edition version of the scene, which had different music. So this is the music that was in the version of the film people saw in theaters in 2003, but it never made it to any album until we put it on the rarities here. So you'll hear some different takes on the Gondor material.
Ooh.
But I always thought this was interesting.
Rohan.
Like, you know, this is part of the Oscar-winning score. This is what people heard and voted for, but never made an album until we did this in 2010.
This is all Shield Maiden of Rohan music?
Right. Theatrical version.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yep. This is one of those pieces that was just written so late in the game there was no chance of it ever appearing on an album.
Right. Nice bit of Howard doing his sort of Korngold style of writing.
It has that same kind of texture as the lighting of the beacons.
Right.
I think there was a comment from Paul Bruchek, one of the music executives at New Line, after the first recording session where they recorded the lighting of the beacons, something along the lines of, "Yep, that's great. Can we have a lot more of it, please?"
And so to be clear, I mean, just that track alone, Shield Maiden of Rohan, is worth picking up. Doug Adams' book, The Music of Lord of the Rings, available at most local small shop retailers and the big ones like Amazon. And here is some Green Dragon gossip in the middle of our show, but I've heard that internally at New Line, they are referring to the War of the Rohirrim feature film animated that they're making as the Shield Maiden show. So, and that is a New Line production.
Oh, okay, cool.
Who owns this music that we just heard? So that music you just heard, Shield Maiden and Rohan, could make an appearance in the upcoming Rohirrim anime feature film coming out in a few years.
Shall see. Interesting question from Mr. Ruddy again here, Mr. John D. Ruddy. He's very observantly pointed out that the Mouth of Sauron music from the extended edition actually made it to the original album for The Return of the King, which is just an example of the film being edited continuously during the scoring process. Quite a bit of the extended edition music for Return of the King was actually recorded during the original sessions. Some of it was re-recorded later, but the scenes were in and out of the film with alarming regularity.
So this is where my ignorance comes into play. The next title of the track I do not recognize at all in any capacity, but I might recognize it as soon as I hear it.
It's Mount Doom. It's the destruction of the ring and all the fall of the tower.
Okay.
This one, when we found this, just blew my mind.
Daryl, thank you for joining us. We know it's a long one, but what do you expect from
Thank you,
4-hour movies?
Those
Who's
triplets
the,
are so hard to perform at that tempo, by the way.
who's the orchestra? Or who's the
Philharmonic
choral?
Orchestra,
Who are the voices?
the London Voices.
Yeah, the London Voices are a choral ensemble that still perform on many, many film scores in London. They're probably the premier group for that kind of thing.
So this is interesting. You'll hear a bit of the fellowship material in here, which is not used in the final version of this composition.
Ooh, we're so close. Yeah, there goes Smeagol.
Ah. And our soloist again at this point is
Renee Fleming.
Renee Fleming,
yes,
the great Renee Fleming.
that's right.
Now listen to the harmonies here. This is very unusual.
Now it gets different.
Mhm. Fellowship and the history themes intertwined here. And it just keeps going.
I think this was written for a different cut of the film.
It was. It included shots of Arwen waking up.
Yes, Australia bookshops might have a hard time getting this book. It's hard to get anything. I can't ship anything to Australia or New Zealand right now. So.
I'm not sure.
Is it available in Australia?
I believe it was previously, so I should think so. Matt is asking about, I believe, referencing the Arwen waking up shots. But yeah, you would see her lying on that platform back in her bed or whatever it was back in Rivendell, and her eyes popping open again. I think eventually it was decided, and probably rightly so, that was a lot to sort of take in from a different location during this moment.
Yeah. There's so much going on in the low strings in this piece.
It's amazing, yeah.
A lot of very interesting thematic deconstruction.
Cliff, Amazon's really going to have to earn this level of emotion. Like, this type of music, I don't see until season 3, 4, 5.
No, not until they, change the shape of the world from flat to round and have Numenor be destroyed. That's when they have an excuse to have music go to the most epic level ever.
This is an alternate take, again, of this scene. It was probably recorded in studio by Howard Shore to a different cut of the movie. People want to ask, why hasn't Peter Jackson given us his unicorn cut yet? This is one of the reasons why. Like, if he re-edits the film again, Howard Shore needs a lot of money for a lot of musicians to to re-record a lot of music.
It's an expensive proposition.
Yeah, and kind of like them the way they are.
So romantic.
Oh, there's a tiny hint of that.
Going from the Fellowship theme, building. Fall of Verdure. One of the most glorious passages in all of 21st century music, at least so far.
I'll say absolutely fabulous.
Is that Soren's theme in a major key? No.
Tears in the eyes of Gandalf.
And here we're approaching the music that would be the cover of the book, the Eagles.
You know what's going on right here musically was always my favorite part of this. It's a very, very inward type of music, as if, you know, Frodo is done looking inside his own soul and now he can just rest. And it's so heartbreaking, this music.
People have, I mean, these scores in general, but certainly these passages have incredibly personal relationships with this music. I like to always sort of envision, well, I had this grand adventure with all of this, so this music means things to me that other people don't understand. But I think that's true for everybody. I think this music, it's the memory of wherever you were in your life at this time and trying to make sense of your place in the world then. I think it's just an ongoing process. You know, I've said before, Lord of the Rings is a very important thing in the early 2000s because it was such a tumultuous time in the world. And sure enough, now 20 years later, it's been a very tumultuous time in the world. And Lord of the Rings has become the topic of discussion again. I've done more interviews and presentations in the past 2 years than I did in the 5, 6, 7 years prior to that. I think things like this, Cliff, I think you said it right. It's very inward looking music. And I think, I don't know, if there a way to put this all into words, I suppose the music wouldn't have to. We'll just let the music do what it needs to do.
Agreed.
And there's still a lot of life in the live to projection performances. People still want to go and see these movies.
Yeah. So we've got Frodo's song here, but this is a mock-up or an alternate. Can you set this up a little bit?
It's a completely alternate concept for Frodo's song. It doesn't even involve lyrics. So you just sort of hear a humming voice on this. So it's a live performance of the vocal with sort of mocked up instrumentation, mocked up orchestration with it.
And Cliff, did this song in its final form go on to win the Oscar?
The end song from the end credits?
Into the West? Yeah.
Yes, it went on to win the Oscar. It was controversial to no one at the time, except perhaps Sir Elton John, who was quoted in all the entertainment press as being relatively bitchy about it. But he lost to Annie Lennox, and it was a really extraordinary moment in popular culture, especially for those kids like me who had grown up with Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart as a powerhouse of musicianship and songwriting. I mean, uncanny how far their pop and rock songwriting craftsmanship could take them. And then Annie Lennox flourished as a multi-Grammy winning artist after the breakup of their band, who still never ever could have predicted that many years later she would be brought in to work with the extraordinary Howard Shore and make Oscar Gold happen. And I'll say one thing for sure: if you're ever at karaoke night it is a bloody hard song to sing. It's really hard to keep that going live. Really is.
Wouldn't we all have been disappointed if Elton John had been magnanimous in defeat anyway?
Yeah, I know.
It's a little
really.
off-brand for Elton John. He's got to be kind of snarky.
And not only did this song win the Oscar for Best
Yes.
Song, Philippa Boyens and I believe Fran Walsh got writing credit on the song when it won for
Yes.
the Grammy Award, which makes Philippa and Fran halfway to an EGOT.
Halfway to an EGOT. That would be Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. Yes.
We should point out this version of the song is not Into the West. This is something that would have been in the place that Into the West eventually occupied.
Yeah.
But this would have been Frodo's song. The original idea was to write a little song, almost a lullaby type of thing, to finish Frodo's story specifically, rather than Into the West, which was a little bit bigger in its purview.
Mm-hmm. We should also add that there is another song which was written and recorded and performed by Annie Lennox, which we'll hopefully get to if we have some time at the end of this.
Yeah,
Oh, good.
which I think is a
Well,
great song.
This is extraordinary. I've never ever heard this
No,
before.
it's a little simple sketch of a thing, very delicate.
Oh, we have
Like you would
music
sing to a child.
journalists in the chat. Better watch our tongues. It's gonna end up on Pitchfork.
Well, not only did Fran and Philippa get halfway to an EGOT, but so did Annie Lennox. She was a multiple Grammy winner before the Oscar. Yes.
Do we know who performed the vocal on this demo, Doug?
We never could get it figured out. No, it was somebody that had been hired just for a day to come in and do it.
Is it in Quenya?
It's just humming. There's no words.
Beautiful.
There was a lyric written for Frodo's song. It did not match up with this melody, so we did include the text in the book, a Sindarin text, directly out of Tolkien, translated by David Sallow. But it doesn't really sync up with this in specific.
But the end title songs are always the ones that seem to get the most attention. There aren't many examples of this on the Rarities, unfortunately, but there are many, many, many demos for Gollum's song from the Two Towers with many, many different artists.
Actually, I can give something here that was never, I don't think, has ever been brought out publicly. There's a question about other artists considered for the end of Return of the King. The original concept that Return of the King would end with a male singer. And the name that was constantly discussed, and I do not know if this person was ever approached or anything ever happened, but there was a thought of having Sting perform the end credits song.
Really?
Yeah, so that was
Really?
the original concept. Yeah.
Another Fields of Gold, perhaps, would have been a great big hit.
Yeah, he just
Would
could
have
have
been a
held
big
the
hit.
sword up, his namesake sword, and made a song about that.
Oh my God! It would have worked on. It would have been so meta.
Yeah, so many levels.
I just have the mental image of Sting in a pair of ridiculous rubber underpants in David
You've been
Lynch's
watching Dune,
in my head
haven't
now.
you?
I love Dune, but not for that reason.
Yeah.
I got 3 more files on this folder. One called Eleanor, and then
Yeah, Eleanor is we named that, of course, for Sam. This is the last piece of music leading into the end credits in The Return of the King, and it's largely the composition you know, but the end is quite different. The thought was to get one more little quote of fellowship material in here, and it didn't really have that curtain lowering effect that I think everyone wanted, but it's a fascinating different take on the end of the story. So this is, of course, Sam returning to the Shire. after the Grey Havens.
Sir James Galway.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so gorgeous.
Sort of emotionally in the same places as we would expect.
I think this may be a different variation of some of the flute material too.
It is. So it would have given you one last little blast of Fellowship there, but it's sort of, it feels more like an announcement than a conclusion, I think. So it didn't quite work like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Then the next two tracks, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask Cliff, can you describe, as a longtime fan, how that movie ended, how that made you feel?
It was perfection because they stuck with the text and had Sam come back to his family and breathe a sigh of strange relief. And at that point, Samwise has kind of resigned himself that there's no more story for him to contribute to. And Professor Tolkien is telling all of us that, you know, this story is about Sam. It's about Samwise's transformation from, you know, that innocent little hobbit who was eager to hear stories of elves and faraway places, and his father sternly telling him that, you know, potatoes and taters is more your wheelhouse. You stick with what you know. And then by the last page, he says, well, I'm back. And that look on his family's face and the innocent look in his children's eyes, they have no clue what their father has just gone through. And the audience is in tears. I was at the Wellington premiere, the world premiere, and these hard-boiled journalists, these entertainment journalists, are weeping like small children in this massive theater, in the Embassy Theater. I'll never forget it.
I remember I think it was a good 2 or 3 years before The Return of the King came out. I think it may even have been before Fellowship came out, and there were some spy shots from the set of the final scene of Sam returning home. And I think when I saw those, I thought, yeah, these films are probably in good hands.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Doug, are we playing these next two?
Well, these next two, so the original idea with the rarities, it was going to be, we wanted to have like a visual component of it. So we were going to do everything in like a DVD and be able to pop up in the corner and discuss what you were hearing. It'd be me and Howard down in the corner in our chairs telling everyone what it was. Kind of like what we're doing right now, actually. But the technology wasn't really quite where we wanted it to be. It was too hard to produce. We recorded some of our commentary track, but not all of it. So we took what we had recorded and turned it into these last two in discussion tracks, which actually we played a little bit of unused music behind it, but it was unused music that was never finished. Like even the takes, the recordings were not complete takes. They just sort of trailed off into nothingness. And we figured it was a way to sort of hide them in there and give fans a little treat. Although they've yelled at us for years, oh, you're talking over this unused music, you're wrecking it. Well, it doesn't, it's not finished music. You can't do anything with it.
Well, if you guys want to hear part 1 and part 2 of what he just described, it's included on the Rarities archive disc that is bundled with the Music of Lord of the Rings hardcover edition. The book by Doug Adams is still available at most bookshops. I don't know worldwide. You know, logistics are a thing, and we're still in the pandemic, but it's available right now on Amazon.com and Amazon Co. UK.
We have shared the link a couple of times here in the Zoom chat. And of course, we are recording this. Hopefully this recording will be there. But yeah, if you're in a certain region, make sure you're going to the correct region of the Amazon or the Barnes & Noble or whatever website that's appropriate for delivery to your region.
That's
and you can
right.
get it. Yeah.
All right, Jim. I've got a folder that says B and a folder that says C. Where do you want to go?
Right. I was going to check my naming conventions. Let's go for B first. You should have 8 audio files in folder B.
Oh my
Do you have time
goodness
to
gracious.
do all these? You want to hit a few things, or are we looking for schedule?
Yeah, you're up at what hour are you
Yeah,
up right now, Jim?
Jim's the.
Actually, let's change it. Should we shake things up a bit? Should we do C first?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Okay.
Oh my gosh, it's nearly 3:30 where you are, Jim. Oh my goodness.
Now, wow. Okay, so there. Set this up. I've got a 12 FOTR and 30 ROTK.
Okay. So way back in April 2001, when the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra was recording the music for The Mines of Moria for the Cannes preview, they also recorded a very early version of the last piece in the Fellowship of the Ring, the Breaking of the Fellowship, and that's what we're going to play for you now.
This is previously unheard.
It's lurking on one of the DVDs. So if you want to, if you're watching the Fellowship Extended Edition, and if you sit through all of the endless fan club credits, you will hear it at the end. But
and so this was not recorded in the sessions for the actual scoring of the film.
It was recorded in New Zealand in April 2001. It was never used. It never appeared anywhere. By the time they got to recording in London, that section of the film had been re-edited. So they completely re-recorded the composition and tweaked it slightly. This is a little different.
And you can find our conversation from earlier this year with the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra describing those sessions on youtube.com/thewandering.net. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here is the earliest recording of the Breaking of the Fellowship.
Oh my goodness.
You can hear that the recording sounds very similar, because the London recordings were made, the Watford recordings were made to emulate the sound of the town hall in New Zealand. If you're a discerning listener, you can tell that it's a different orchestra. You probably can hear some just interpretational differences, but the acoustics are pretty similar.
Well, if you pick up any album of Dvorak's The Planets, I can always tell immediately the difference between different orchestras when I hear them. So I could definitely hear Howard's music done differently too.
I'm not sure what the original intention was for this recording. I don't think it was ever intended to be used in the film, but it may have been used potentially as part of a montage of footage shown to studio executives round about the time of the Cannes preview.
In a lot of these things, proof of concept recordings can be very important. There's
particularly with something this expensive.
I can answer your question, Jim.
My mistake, Tim Dolph. Why did I even say Dvorak? I was talking about Holst. Never mind. Sorry.
This is brand new. This is the brand new set. Oh man. This is the brand new set. And to answer Jim's question, the bonus features include the Cannes Film Festival footage preview that the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra did. And so this recording was meant to be an extra scene that was going to be shown at Cannes. And this is the final version of what was shown at Cannes, recorded by the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra.
You can tell some of the whistle performances coming up here are probably more notably different than the orchestral stuff.
personally like the New Zealand symphonies version for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it was the facilities that they recorded in.
It has a slightly different quality to it.
Oh, this is remarkably different.
Isn't most of this stuff on YouTube? It's a great question. It is not. Maybe it is. Maybe people have bootlegged it.
There's a fair amount of illegitimate stuff circulating on YouTube.
Warner Brothers is pretty quick on the copyright though.
I believe we may have lost Doug, but he should be back in a minute.
Yeah, there is a little less weight on those horns. Maybe there's a little fewer drums on it.
So there is a slightly longer version of this piece that we can't play for you, but it was never finished. There are sort of choral overlays and things missing. So I suspect if there was more time in April 2001, this would have been somewhat more refined.
Doug, we've got Jordan Reynolds' friend Chad from Texas in the chat room.
Ah, cool. Talked to Jordan, what was that, last spring sometime, I think? Been a busy year.
I hadn't read the books. So when Sam Browns, I thought he really was, that was it. After they killed Gandalf, and I was like, this movie would go there. And, yeah. What a movie. I was fully invested.
Peter is so careful in creating that shot of the hand reaching into the water to recreate and mirror it later when Samwise reaches down from the Samath Naur at the crack of doom. To help Frodo at the last moment.
And parallel the arms catching underwater and then arms catching over fire. I mean, that's it.
Yeah, it's so cool. The magic of filmmaking, people.
It's interesting how the music calls to mind these images so readily, almost to the point where we start ascribing to it. Well, it's because the strings are doing this and it feels like the one arm, and it's such a strange thing that we begin to draw these connections. That was one of the hardest things about doing the book, is making sure I wasn't making up connections that were in my head and not intended by Howard or the filmmakers. But it's purposeful synesthesia where we just combine the arts in our mind and make one final product where everything fits together.
It goes back to what you were saying earlier. There are some things you just can't easily put into words.
Yeah, right. Nor should one, I suppose.
These completely intangible connections.
Yeah.
But that was a great way to describe it. A purposeful synesthesia. I think that's, great. That's a great way to describe it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Jim, what's this next song?
So we touched on the fact that there was a different end title song that actually did hit the recording floor and was performed by Annie Lennox. So we will play that for you now.
Oh my goodness gracious. Here we go.
Is this used well the days? This is used well the days.
Oh, okay. I've heard about this before.
Oh, it's a great piece. This piece has a less song through composed, and there are times that I actually prefer that. If I'm in the mood for that sort of thing.
This was in the sheet music. You can buy the Lord of the Rings piano sheet music, and this song is included.
I think this has been performed live once or twice. It was done in Lucerne back in 2010, I think.
Caitlin did it, right?
Yeah.
If you missed our episode 2 weeks ago, we talked with Royd Tolkien, who's currently touring all over Europe with the soundtrack.
So as I say, this piece is maybe a little more, I hate to use the word operatic because that gives you ideas of scale, but I think operatic in the sense that it feels like it's moving forward dramatically. A song tends to be a little more circular. It stays in one mood, one mode, and kind of revolves around that. This feels like it's sort of a piece of the storytelling of the drama. Would it have had the same sense of conclusion and, you know, that beauty that Into the West has? Maybe not. But it's a very cool piece. And it in many ways feels more a part of the score than a standalone thing, which I sometimes think is a very cool thing.
Yeah, interesting
that is so
observation
beautiful.
from Kathy in the chat, suggesting that if this was the final song, it sounds like it would be for those still living, whereas Into the West was for those leaving.
I think that's exactly what they had in mind. It was a song for, you know, you saw Sam returning home and picking up his life again. And I think this song was more about that at that point. Yeah. Great observation.
Another quick question. Someone was asking if this was available on CD at all. It is not, unfortunately.
DVD, though.
Yes, if Justin could just wave the limited edition green Return of the King single CD at the camera. If you have a copy of this at home, this also has a DVD in the back, which includes a little documentary on the making of the score and that song.
How cool. How super, super cool.
This is a DVD extra, Howard Shore and Introspective.
That documentary is wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the documentary I mentioned earlier, directed by Howard's wife, Elizabeth, who is a accomplished documentary filmmaker.
And a fine lyricist. She does a lot of lyrics for his pieces these days, too.
She does.
And so that includes what? Or It includes this music on this DVD.
The music's
It,
on there.
it includes that
documentary's on
song
there.
and a small documentary, about
Yeah.
half an hour or so.
Wow. And then
Don't tell me you've had that sitting on your shelf since 2003 and you've never actually put that in your DVD player.
with the slipcase. These ones don't have the slipcase, which I don't know. This one doesn't have that flip book, those images. But there are 2 discs in the 2 towers. Interesting. I'm gonna have to go through this.
It's like 20 years old, man.
Yeah.
It's the special edition. You were holding up this special edition of Fellowship of the Ring, right? That's what that was. Everybody in the chat is asking what that was.
When they did the original editions of these scores, the albums, so before the complete recordings, these faux leather-bound versions. The red is Fellowship, the blue is Two Towers, the green is Return of the King. I can tell you about the colors in a moment if you're really interested. But they did those, and then they did standard plastic jewel cases with a little, small square version of the poster art that would fit in there. The colors of these, do not match the marketing materials that were for everything else, because these colors were chosen first. This was originally, Fellowship was going to be the red movie, Return of the King was going to be the green movie.
I'm glad you answered that question.
I know. I think I've answered that question more than any other over the years, to be honest with you. So the CDs were part of the original discussion of what the studio wanted the color branding to be. By the time of the video releases, it was changed, but they'd already used red for Fellowship for the CD, so they had to follow through. And blue for
none of them match.
Nothing matches. Everything was wrong.
Everything was wrong. 0 of them match.
I still think that the albums are right and the videos are wrong, but that might show my perspective, I suppose.
Indeed.
How can we help you guys? How can we help you get this book published?
I don't know. There does seem to be quite a strong interest in it, especially in the last couple of years. Yeah. So we did do booklets for the CD releases. I think we did the best documentary on the music that's been in any of the.
There's your name.
Yeah, that's me.
Beautiful gold letters on black, high quality black art paper. This beautiful paper, and these booklets are gorgeous.
It's that was a real thrill. That was a much different process for me because Lord of the Rings, I came to things after it was well into production and the series had been going on for a while. All the Hobbit films and scores, I got to be there right from the very beginning. So I would see the movies 3-4 months before they came out and hear the scores while they were being created. And it was a much more streamlined process in terms of my involvement with them, which really made it nice. And if people here don't know, yes, we did write I suppose I wrote a Music of the Hobbit films book. It does exist. It is complete. It is not released. It would be nice to get it released. As I say, maybe with Amazon entering the picture with his show, it might be a way to sort of jumpstart some of these things.
It's called synergy, baby. Synergy.
Seems like we're in the right place. Yeah.
And I think, given that we're fast coming up on the 10th anniversary of the first Hobbit film next year, I think we're at the kind of stage where we could bring out some complete recordings if there is demand for that. And
the question is,
rarities on a disc somewhere?
Yes, someone just asked, would there be a rarities disc involved with that publication as well?
I think there certainly could be. There's probably more generated in terms of traditional rarities with the first score than with the second or third. But there's a number of them, absolutely.
There are. Yeah. In terms of additional material for complete recordings, there's probably about just under 2 hours of music that's currently unreleased.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
So good. So what is this rarities disc 2? What was the second folder that?
So are we on B now?
Yes.
So B is a selection of pieces that are actually from the original albums, but they have a few interesting bits contained within them.
So we have been at this for nearly 3 hours, folks, and there's still more music. And
No complaints from anyone in the audience.
I know,
complaints.
but I think
But
what I'm going to
truly.
do. Can we share?
Nikki says,
that link?
bring it.
Can we share that link, Jim?
If you just share the Spotify playlist, that's got all these tracks.
So here's what we're gonna do. Instead of going into it deep on this session, because it's been a long time, and it is very early in the morning for our friend Jim here. I think what we're gonna do is I'm going to drop this in the Zoom chat link, so you guys can go to Spotify and listen for yourselves.
But what I will do, I'm not going to do it now, but what I will do at some point over the next 24 hours, I will tweet some explanatory notes explaining some differences and things to look out for in these tracks.
Yeah, and we are happy to have you guys back at any time. Maybe we can do a 1 hour show of just those 8 files.
Of course we could. Yes.
So I put it in the Zoom chat. So everybody, there is a super secret Spotify playlist that is just for you. So enjoy the music and follow Jim J. Ware at Jim J. Ware on Instagram and Twitter. Doug Adams Music on Twitter. What's your Instagram? Are you on Instagram?
I don't have Instagram. No, there's enough middle-aged men on Instagram already. They don't need another one. So
I had completely forgotten that I have an Instagram account.
Yeah, do you have an Instagram?
Until you tagged me in it earlier, Justin.
I just searched for Jim J. Ware and like you popped up.
Well, thankfully, it is actually me. So, there you go.
Well, I guess you can.
Yeah, there's a
post some
fake
of the
Doug
music
Adams
there.
on Twitter now, so stay away from that guy.
There's also there is another Jim Ware on Twitter as well, who is nothing to do with me. So
He used to be beardy Jim Ware, but you've thrown that off. You keep growing a beard.
I've just completely confused matters on that front. So
The world is a messy place.
Well,
I don't like sharks as much as he does.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I like him a lot, though.
This has been a real treat going through the Rarities disc that comes with your book, the music of Lord of the Rings, again available at all major bookshops, and just a real treat. After 20 years, we're still hearing stories. And Cliff, I learned some things today that I wasn't aware of.
I did too, and I heard some Annie Lennox that I've never heard before. And
the chat room, Menemin in the chat room says, "I've cried a few times tonight."
That is wonderful. And I guess the larger perspective, I think, should prevail. There's something that Howard brought to this project, which is irreplaceable, and the fact that it has taken on such a life, a musical life, and a cultural life beyond the films it's just something that doesn't happen with other movie scores. It's just amazing, really.
Yeah, I mean, it transcended any sort of commercial project to becoming something that was really a permanent part of the arts. And we've danced around the subject. I think part of the reason we keep coming back and talking about these things, I mean, number one, first and foremost, it's wonderful to see friends again, and this is a part of my home is to see these people and talk about these things. But I think after 20 years, we're still searching for the words, and I don't think we'll ever get any closer, but I think it's fun to look. There's something about these scores and these stories that's it's so simply understood and so impossible to express in human language. I guess that's why we need music.
And well, Professor Tolkien brought us the human language, and from there it inspired Howard in phenomenal ways. I guess we could, in good faith, we could link it back to that, perhaps.
Right.
Well, and, I hope you get the call in the next several months that a big TV show needs your help on a secret project, and if we don't hear from you until September, I will understand.
Yeah. Hey, I'll be ready for that call. If it comes in, we'll make it happen.
So exciting.
Amazon, I hope you do right by fans. I hope everybody's learned a little something more about something they thought they already had enough knowledge of. And Cliff, this is just a real treat. And if you want to spend even more time with
Very
Doug
much.
and Jim, last Christmas we all did a 24-hour watch along for all 6 Middle Earth movies, the entire Hobbit trilogy, the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, extended editions. It's all free on YouTube. Go to our youtube.com/theoneringnnet, and you can find our soundtrack watch-alongs with these guys. And
Really
if you want
good
to
stuff.
keep learning about this music, I mean, this has just been fascinating. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you for
pleasure.
staying up and doing this marathon experience with us. Thank you, Jim. The live chat has such a synchronized mind, and they are acknowledging you as well for staying up this bloody late. So thank you. It's great.
Always a pleasure. And if there's any questions in the chat we haven't got to, feel free to shoot them out on Twitter, and we will get to them. Or I will get to them when I'm more conscious.
We'll get them. Thank you for the secret Spotify link, and thank you for your time and your endless generosity to share this wisdom, great wisdom, with all of us. And I guess it's time to end the show, don't you think, Justin?
I think so.
Special shout out to all the chatters and the live audience who came to join us and to remind me the difference between Antonin Dvorak and Gustav Holst. I'm glad I can remember that now going forward. And I want to say thank you to everybody behind the scenes, meaning you, Justin, pulling the buttons and the levers, making it happen. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful new year. I guess we'll be doing another show in the new year. Yes. Good night and good luck. I'd like to say
toast to Tolkien.
that's the one thing I have to say, because it's literally closer than we think. Professor Tolkien's birthday, and worldwide, wherever you are in whatever time zone, you gather with friends, and at 9:00 p.m. you raise your glass and say, "To the professor," at 9:00 p.m.
January 3rd, right?
On January 3rd, absolutely. January 3rd coming right up. That will be Tolkien's birthday. Someone said 130th birthday. Good heavens, that's exciting. Thank you again, everybody. Look out for yourselves. Have a terrific new year, and buenos noches y buena suerte. See you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.